from him. Mr. Obama recalled that the first thing he did involving an issue or policy or politics was a protest against apartheid.
I would study his words and his writings. The day he was released from prison, he gave me a sense of what human beings can do when they're guided by their hopes and not by their fears. And like so many around the globe, I cannot fully imagine my own life without the example that Nelson Mandela set. And so long as I live, I will do what I can to learn from him.
Mandela's journey from prisoner to a president, said Mr. Obama, embodied the promise that human beings and countries can change for the better.
His commitment to transfer power and reconcile with those who jailed him set an example that all humanity should aspire to, whether in the lives of nations or our own personal lives. The fact that he did it all with grace and with humor and an ability to acknowledge his own imperfections only makes the man that much more remarkable.
Mr. Obama and Mr. Mandela met just once, a spontaneous encounter during a conference in Washington in 2005 when Mr. Obama was still a junior U.S. Senator. When he visited South Africa earlier this year, Mr. Obama did not see Mr. Mandela, who was seriously ill at the time. He did tour Robben Island, where Mr. Mandela was imprisoned for 18 of the 27 years he spent behind bars. In a speech at the University of Cape Town, Mr. Obama described the Mandela legacy as young people, black, white, Indian, everything in between, living and learning together in a South Africa that is free and at peace. First Lady Michelle Obama and the Obama daughters, Malia and Sasha, did get to meet with Mr. Mandela during a visit to South Africa in 2011. Members of Congress and former U.S. presidents offered tributes to Mr. Mandela. Former President Bill Clinton said history will remember Nelson Mandela as a champion for human dignity and freedom for peace and reconciliation. Former President George H.W. Bush said Mr. Mandela set a powerful example of redemption and grace, calling him a man of tremendous moral courage who changed the course of history. Addressing the people of South Africa, President Obama said Mandela's legacy is a free South Africa at peace with itself that is an example to the world. Mr. Mandela, he said, was a man who took history in his hands and bent the arc of the moral universe toward justice. The White House has not yet provided any information about when President Obama will, as is expected, travel to South Africa for the state funeral. Dave Robinson, VOA News, the White House.
At his death, Nelson Mandela was revered in the United States, as he was most everywhere else. But it was not always that way. VOA State Department correspondent Scott Stearns reports on how U.S. views of Mr. Mandela evolved from Cold War communist to anti-apartheid hero.
Former U.S. President John F. Kennedy said that the United States in 1962 stood behind an extraordinary group of African leaders building new countries fresh from winning their independence.
This has been an unknown continent to us because it was dominated by Europe. Now it's opening up and we want to be part of it. And our interest is totally disinterested. We have no great commercial history. We have no record of exploitation. We have supported the United Nations efforts in Africa. We want them to be independent.
All his outreach to leaders in Algeria and Ghana and Guinea, Mr. Kennedy's extraordinary group of Africans did not include Nelson Mandela's African National Congress. Apartheid South Africa was Washington's biggest Cold War trading partner in Africa, with reliable uranium supplies, swift call for the U.S. Navy, and 4 missile tracking stations. Secretary of State Dean Rusk opposed economic sanctions, warning that weakening tight rule might lead to communist infiltration. Former President Lyndon Johnson kept to the anti-communism track, despite then-Senator Robert F. Kennedy's 1966 meeting with banned ANC leader Albert Luther and his speech at the University of Cape Town, during which he famously spoke of each strike against injustice, creating echoes of hope.
Unearthing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring. Those who move building corridors which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance.
During the Nixon and Ford administrations, the value of white rule as a bulwark against communism was reinforced by Mr. Mandela's support for Cuban President Fidel Castro and more than 30,000 Cuban troops in neighboring Angola who blocked the 1975 South African advance on Rwanda.
Cuando se produce la invasión de
South African troops invaded Angola, Castro told reporters Cubans could not stand by and do nothing. Washington. Former President Jimmy Carter's Secretary of State Cyrus Vance led a United Nations delegation to South Africa in 1978 after Pretoria seized what is now Namibia. The Carter administration tightened an arms embargo but continued to oppose economic sanctions. Former President Ronald Reagan told CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite that if the United States could negotiate with Russia, it could fully continue to negotiate with a friendly nation like South Africa that strategically is essential to the free world in its production of minerals. Author John Artia chronicled Reagan's foreign policy. At the height of the Cold War, South Africa was a place where the most important strategic resources were located, vanadium and other important strategic metals in huge abundance. And so the authoritarian and racist government there was able to trade on that for some time because the Soviet Union, which was our enemy, had its own natural resources that greatly exceeded our own. Anti-apartheid protests on U.S. college campuses grew. Congress voted to override President Reagan's veto of economic sanctions. Congressman Louis Stokes told the television channel C-SPAN about civil disobedience outside the South African embassy.
That was the least we could do because of Nelson Mandela. Spent 28 years in a prison for the fighting for his people and not having committed any crimes. That we could certainly go to jail one night to highlight the inequalities of apartheid in South Africa.
With Mr. Mandela's release from prison in 1990, former President George Herbert Walker Bush invited South African President F.W. de Klerk to the White House to show U.S. support for what he called a new brand of leadership, more realistic about political change.
The freeing of Mandela clearly is a very positive sign. I think there's more to be done, but there's things that he has done that I think deserve some of our support and I'd say appreciation.
U.S. anti-apartheid leaders opposed to the invitation, the first for a South African president. Activist Randall Robinson said President Bush was moving too fast.
I asked him to be consistent with previous American behavior on this issue and also be consistent with our responses to other nations that are led by tyrants of this order.
Mr. Mandela's work for racial reconciliation and his election as South Africa's first popularly chosen president made him, in former President Bill Clinton's words, a hero for people everywhere.
For a long time, the name Nelson Mandela has stood for the quest for freedom. Apartheid could not silence him. And when he was freed, Americans all across this country who had fought for justice in South Africa rejoiced.
Past positions on ending apartheid became part of U.S. politics. Former President George W. Bush's campaign manager, Carl Rove, says it was part of vetting Vice President Dick Cheney.
Cheney had been a very conservative member of Congress from Wyoming who would have to defend his voting record, including voting against a resolution calling for the release of Nelson Mandela from prison.
Mr. Bush welcomed Mr. Mandela to the White House, calling him a symbol of courage. But the South African needed a visa waiver because he was still on an official U.S. terrorist watch list. Congresswoman Barbara Lee says it was a promising effort to set that straight.
This is one of those moments where we have seen the Secretary of State, Republicans, Democrats, all of us working together in this terrible, terrible policy that we have with regard to the ANC and Nelson Mandela.
President Barack Obama says Nelson Mandela sets a standard for service, whether we're students, shopkeepers, or farmers, cabinet ministers, or presidents. He calls on us to serve our fellow human beings and better our communities. Scott Stearns, VOA News, the State Department.